All right, cool.
Okay, so my name is Gilbert, and this is Dr. Douglas Hulstedt. I'll ask some few questions about him. Mainly, first of all, maybe if you could say a little bit about yourself, your credentials, and what you've done in your profession here in California.
Sure. Yeah, so I finished residency in 1987 at LA County Hospital. I got board certified in pediatrics in 1989, and then I recertified twice over the years. In the meantime, somewhere in there, I was actually with Kaiser for 10 years. I was actually a partner in Southern California Kaiser. After that, I had a small private practice. After that, my family and I moved to Monterey, California in 1999 and was in a private practice with some other practitioners from 99 to 2010. 2010, I did private practice all by my lonesome. And so that's kind of where I've been through the years. So my story is there, but the start of my story is actually really when I started dealing with children, and the children started showing up because I started treating them in about 2000. In 2000, this is the story that started rolling in. My child was walking, my child was talking, my child had good eye contact. I could give my child 2 set instructions. And then my child received lost eye contact, lost speech, couldn't walk for 4 weeks, started stimming like a maniac. Stimming is flapping arms, and then has huge sensory issues. Takes us about 2 hours to get our child's socks on every morning. And then we have to duct tape our child's socks on to keep them on. Dr. Hulstedt, we think our child is caused by the... So because I was so well trained, I understood that, of course, can't hurt anybody. So obviously what's going on with this family is that they're just crazy. So that was my first family. And so for a physician, if you realize that the patient is in a crazy family, you just kind of put them to the side because you don't want to deal with crazy people. Well, second family comes in, tells me exactly the same story. It's like they're reading from the same book, same page, same paragraphs, same sentences. And I'm looking at that thinking, this is just bizarre. Here I've got this wild story in 2 families. And then it dawned on me, I knew exactly what was going on with this second family. Obviously, there was an epidemic of crazy families going around because, of course, can't hurt anybody. Everybody knows that. That's what we've been trained for. So I blithely went on, continued collecting different families with, and I kept getting the same story. By 2003, remember I started in 2000, by 2003 I had 10 families, all of which were telling me the same story. It was just like they had just been newly minted from the printing press. So here I am wandering around, and the very dim light bulb over my head started screwing in. It's like, oh, Houston, we got a problem. 2004 rolled around. There was a study by, it was called the Stefano study. He was one of the big mucky mucks in, I think he's still there. And I got very excited because they made an advance announcement. They said, we're going to look at administration subsequent. So I was waiting with bated breath. The study came out. Lo and behold, they said, we've looked at administration subsequent. There's no correlation whatsoever. And I'm looking at that like, what? I got my 10 families on one hand. So what are the possibilities? Well, the big possibility would be that there was a cabal of parents outside my door, and they're all saying, okay, so when you see Holstead, you're going to tell them this story. And I thought, yeah, that's possible. That's like me winning lotto 4 straight weeks running. And by the way, I don't play lotto. Or plan B is that there's a fatal flaw with this study. And of course, just pouring that information base into my brain was kind of like pouring rocks into my head. But so I was rattling around for about 6 months when I finally made the decision that there was a fatal flaw with the study. It wasn't hard for me to kind of curl my brain around the idea of a fatally flawed study because I'd had experience with a fatally flawed information all the way back into. I had a family of 3 children, the mother turned to me and said, "Do you see all these kids?" And I said, "Yeah, you think I'm blind? I see the kids." And she said, "Yeah, all these 3 kids have had times." And so because I'd read my textbook, I knew that you could never get again once you got it. So I knew that there probably what had happened was that there were 2 pediatricians who were less than worth their salt, and they'd made a wrong diagnosis on the first 2 diagnoses of. And then there was one good pediatrician, right, that made the diagnosis. Well, unfortunately for me, the children all came in a 4th time, and then I was the less than sterling diagnostician that made the diagnosis of time on each of the 3 kids. So at that point, I realized my textbook was wrong. Then there was a study that came out and said, no, you can get 1 in 10,000 times. And I'm looking at that. I'll probably see about 15,000 patients in my career. And that did not square with what I was seeing. So I threw, not only did I throw the textbook out, not a very far distance because it's a big textbook, but I certainly was able to throw out that one study. Later that year, or maybe a year later, there was another study that said, no, you can actually get maybe on a second time, maybe on an order of 1 out of 100. And that actually squares with my experience. So it wasn't that hard for me to say, you know what, there's a fatal flaw here. But that was 2004. And the 2 conclusions I came to was, 1, there's a fatal flaw. 2, I'll probably never know what's wrong with that study. So I was right on the first point, and I was wrong on the second point. There was a fatal flaw, and I did find out what was wrong with that study. And it was actually in 2014, was one of the 5 principal investigators who he came forward. I don't think anybody else did, but he did. And he said, you know, we all got in a circle. We had the recycled garbage cans, the blue garbage cans, and we all threw our database into the garbage, except I've got this. And he showed a different data set than what had been presented by this. So to kind of distill what's going on, when you take out raw data, you're doing something called lying, or you're committing fraud. That's what we call bad. So I was not a happy camper in 2014 with it. And as it was, I had stopped really trusting this about 2004 just because of the Stefano study. I didn't feel like it was accurately portraying what I was seeing. So to go on with other things, 2017 was the Mawson study. The Mawson study was done by Andrew Mawson. He's a PhD in statistics. It was not funded by this. It was actually funded by different parents groups. And what Mawson found was, in a fully unvaccinated population versus a population, what he found was a 420% increase in the amount of 500% increase in the amount of ADD, ADHD, 700% increase in the amount of ear tubes, PE tubes, 700% increase in the amount of hospitalizations for pneumonias, 3,000% increase in the amount of allergic rhinitis, 300% increase in the amount of asthma, 300% increase in the amount of eczema. And there's the next study, which was the Peter Aby study out of Africa. So Peter Aby was the godfather of in a place called Guyana-Bissau. And he was giving DPT at 3 months of age and then at 5 months of age. So the kids were supposed to get a total of 2 vaccinations. If the kids, however, had come in early, they actually waited until 5 months of age to give a single. So what happened was he got 2 groups of kids. One group of kids got 1 group of kids got 2. And then he compared them. And the first question he asked, which is the million-dollar question, is, well, did any of the children in either of these groups die from diphtheria, tetanus, or whooping cough? So the answer on that one is no, none of the children died from diphtheria, tetanus, or whooping cough, which is great because that means you're working. So essentially, we can all go home and do a happy dance. Unfortunately, Peter Aby asked one more question. And his question was, if I look at all-cause death, is there a difference between the one group and the two group? And unfortunately, the one group is actually dying 500% less frequently than the two group. So Gilbert, at this point, do you have any questions for me?
No, I was going down my list, and it seems like my next question was, what is the most clear study that show that vaccines are causing this? And it seems like you answered it with the Monson and Peter A B study.
No, actually, those are not the clearest studies, and I'll get to the clearest studies here in a second. The clearest study is the study that is a lawsuit that's actually going against a guy named Joe Biden, and it was put together by a grandmother. None of these things, by the way, other than the Stefano study where there's a clear case of fraud, other than that, none of them had been put together by the. But the clearest study in my mind in watching all this unfold is the thecontrolgroup.org study. And that is actually the world's largest grouping of true control subjects, meaning those subjects never received any whatsoever. And it's actually the world's largest. It's bigger than anything it has, but I think it has some ulterior motives in my view. So the control group study, because of the power of the statistics in it, I believe is absolutely overwhelming. And the control group study, it shows absolute, which is a word that doctors don't use. And the second word that doctors don't use is causation. So we're talking about absolute causation on this order. 1,000% increase in the amount of learning disabilities, speech delays, developmental delays, spectrum disorder, ADD, ADHD, strabismus, diabetes, epilepsy in adults, epilepsy in children, cancer in adults, cancer in children, multiple chronic diseases, and then a 660% increase in sudden infant death syndrome. So every one of those is absolute causation, meaning the things are causing all those things that I just rattled off to you. To my mind, that is the most powerful and devastating knife wound to the chest to the idea that we're actually doing anyone any favors. The study itself shows that children that are fully untreated are 1,099% healthier than the children. And what that means to me is that we have really, we've messed up an entire generation of children with our. That's what that means to me.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear number. So yeah, my next question is, when did companies start marketing or targeting to the children? I know they target to everybody, but like childhood.
Yeah, so I do know, I'm not sure when they started, but I do know that there are 2 countries in the world that can actually advertise a pharmaceutical, and we're in one of them, the United States, and I believe it's New Zealand. There is a rule that had been set down. It was a law in ancient Babylon, and it said if you pander to children that you were susceptible to capital punishment. And I believe we should probably reinstitute that rule from Babylon because we're pandering to children with the pharmaceutical stuff that's coming out. So anyway, but ancient Babylon. So it's happened before.
Yeah. And my next point is the CDC even admits 1 in 44 children will be diagnosed with autism. So if this number is so high and it's on track to increase, or why is it so high? And why are boys, from what I've read, more affected by these things?
Yeah, so when I first started in 2000, the doctors that I was training under were really nervous because they saw this extraordinary increase in, and the numbers that they were quoting back in 2000 was 1 out of 562. So, and they said, we're seeing a continual increase. So the 1 out of 44 that you're quoting, I believe is even now an underestimate, but we are seeing boys about 4 times as likely as girls to get. I've seen both genders with autism, so it doesn't seem to be a huge amount, but 4 to 1 ratio, boys to girls. I believe in Ireland the incidence of autism is something on the order of 1 out of 17 boys right now, which is just amazing, just amazing. uh, looked at the incidence of autism in Utah because they continued to see an increase. And there's a whistleblower by the name of Zimmerman. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but Zimmerman actually looked at the data and realized that the CDC was spiking the data. They were trying to make it look like there wasn't a continual increase in the problem. So obviously I've been training myself in regards to and how to deal with it and also what's going on with it. It's unfortunately not just one factor. I believe that, these are a gigantic piece of the puzzle, but so are pesticides, so is mercury in maternal mouths. The exposure of mercury from a mom with a mouthful of mercury is quite significant. It concentrates about 6 times as much in the wombs of pregnant women. So the kids are actually getting bathed in mercury, and that's not good. It was previous that the actually had a lot of mercury in them, and then people started actually crunching the numbers, figuring out how much mercury the babies were getting, and then they took it out around 2000, I'm going to say. But they switched it out for something called aluminum, and then the aluminum is probably doing the same stuff that the mercury was doing. We do know that in the population that when there's been an unfortunate death from whatever, when they do an autopsy on the brains of these kids, they're coming in with 4 times as much aluminum, and I believe the source is the.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I know you mentioned the causes or like the symptoms in the very beginning, but since the rate is going to be so high in the future, what can someone expect to deal with if their child is diagnosed with autism or some other neurological disease caused by these and you mentioned that they're not always curable, but what are some things that you found that do help?
Right. I can. So I work with a group called MAPS, Medical Association for Pediatric Special Needs. It used to be DAN, and it's kind of morphed into MAPS. We have the ability to actually make things a lot better. Because it's multifactorial, you have to deal with a multifactorial system, kind of like a biological systems approach, where you treat the inflammation, you treat the immune system because it's been turned on in a very ugly way. And you have to actually treat gut issues because most of the kids have a gut dysbiosis. Most of the kids are yeasty. Their metabolic systems themselves are not functional. So you really want to tune in and make sure that their mitochondria are working. But you've got all these different systems that need to actually be integrated together, and oftentimes they do. Like with mitochondrial dysfunction, if it's not functioning appropriately, then the kids get constipated. If the kids get constipated, then the kids are, what happens then? Oh, they get toxic. So they're not able to get rid of toxins. So once you're toxic, you also have a much greater need for all kinds of vitamins. And those aren't being approached because most of us aren't thinking in a systems approach manner. Because there are all these things swirling around, you've got to actually juggle about 6 or 7 or 8 different balls in the air in order for these children to get better. And it's very similar to Alzheimer's, actually. There's a book by Dr. Dale Bredesen. It's called The End of Alzheimer's. And he's picked out 36 different points that need to essentially be checked off on an Alzheimer's patient in order to actually get them out of an Alzheimer's state. The autistic kids, they got plenty of stuff going on. One other thing that's come up recently for treatment of children is these kids have a folate receptor antibody that has been activated so that although they may have a functional amount of folate in their systems, they actually have like 0 folate in their brains. And so probably neither you nor I has ever been pregnant, but the women that have been, if and when they go to their OB-GYNs, you'll notice that the OB-GYNs are always recommending folate. Folate's hugely important for neurological development. The neural tube defects oftentimes are folate issues. So it's big, big stuff. The guesstimate is about 80% of the are having blocking antibodies. So unless you test for it, you're never going to know. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My next question, this might be a hypothesis that you may have, but why are big companies doing this, and are they being willfully ignorant, or are they just sadistic at the very top and money?
I think in any evaluation of a situation, one needs to realize what's the highest standard that a group of people has. And for a company, and that's just probably any company, the bottom line is to make money. That is, it's not a particularly moral stance, but that's what's happening with the transnational companies. They actually want to make money. So it's not very moral, and it's not something that I can live with, although I would like to make money. I can't use that as my pole star, my star by which I guide my life. I believe that's the gigantic problem with the pharmaceutical industry. These are a group of people that have they've lied, they've committed fraud in their studies, and then they've essentially killed off upwards of 100,000 people in regards particularly to Vioxx. I don't know if you're aware of Vioxx, but it was a product that it's estimated that at least 100,000 and maybe up to 500,000 people got killed off by that product. Well, they knew that they were going to kill off people, and they never told anybody. The other problem with the entire program is there's no one accountable except the parents. The parents are accountable for taking care of their wounded, injured, and maimed child. We have the U.S. government that is almost abjectly not accountable for something that they're ordering. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry has a get-out-of-jail-free card because they have no liability whatsoever. There is a program called it's Injury Court, and the Injury Court has paid out about $4.4 billion over the years. That sounds like a lot of money. My guesstimate is if they were actually paying out the appropriate amounts, it would be on the order of $100 trillion or trillions of dollars, trillions of dollars anyway. What is going to happen, though, is we're loading down society, and I don't think we're going to be able to function much longer because of all the people that have ADD, ADHD, the autism spectrum. Society doesn't function real well with people that have issues with the ability to collect thoughts and go and make functional decisions.
Right. And my next question kind of shifts the topic to the more recent things. Does the recent have any known side effects that people should be made aware of, such as reproductive, immune system suppression, heart issues, cancers, or are they similar to the old side effects?
So I haven't done extensive research on the jabs, but what I do see is that there seem to be an inordinate amount of marriages with women who've had their 2 jabs, and the database is not being presented appropriately. It's just like, boy, someone's lying to us. I've got 4 family members that I believe are injured, but they won't even admit it. And the injuries that I believe are coming directly from COVID are pretty monstrous. One family member has a brain tumor behind her eye, and I believe that started after her 3 jabs. One family member has something called minimal change glomerulonephritis, which her nephrologist looked up and said, well, no, it's not being reported about, so it must not be true. But she got it after having received 2